finals begin tonight.
Really? What time?
8 o'clock, so.
Well, we'll be out of the way.
Not to defer the town's business, but. Thou shalt not harm. Please.
Yeah, we'll move on. I'm not that.
That's
evil. Okay. So anyway,
Or DVR or whatever.
Gerald is absent. Vern, Dave, Bruce, Eric. What's trash can? Here it is. So, the only thing that we have to do tonight, from my view, you know, from this up first, is just have to get me to tell me this anything, so I don't have to.
The only thing I was was making comments on the comments of the public hearing.
Excuse me?
The only thing I was thinking of tonight was comments on the public hearing.
Right, but we told Paula she had to defer those at the select board meeting to the public hearing, so, remember that?
Yeah, but she never, well, okay.
Well, they got passed through the system.
Not a whole lot of comments.
Oh, this is just,
Again, we wrote was a lot of other comments. One that I could have done.
okay, this is the appellants. Well, I don't know, I'll figure that out later. I can never keep track of the appellants and who's what, etc. So anyway, you guys, just so to update on where we are with everything else, you guys open your emails up from the, and saw what I got sent to town hall. Everybody should be getting their mailbox. You should be getting this notice here,
Yeah.
right? And that was the summary of changes. I went through the ordinances and laid them down side by side, and that's the, that's what I came up with for the changes. It doesn't seem to be that, I mean, it's not that big of amount of changes. But technically, we're supposed to do it, so. And then this letter was sent out. I did put that one graphic on there. And the first page basically told everybody there's a hearing, and roughly, you know, very short synopsis of why it's not on 10. And that's why, basically why, that's from your report, Bruce, that you read.
Yeah.
And except for I added this so people can apply it to town. And by the way, it's on a bunch of actually different places, but it's on the Minnesota government website. It's for a lot of documents, so I actually quite a bit. And then this is the July 1st meeting. You guys have any comments about that? Good? Okay. So on the 27th, kind of what we were kind of describing a few minutes ago, if you remember that Paula had wanted to present this stuff on behalf of the task force on wind at the select board's meeting, where she was objecting to the thing even being on the agenda at all.
Mm-hmm.
So then we said she had to defer it to this. So what I did tonight was I went through, I cut and pasted, you know, all the comments section by section into this, and I had actually written up answers a couple weeks ago to it. And then actually go back and read up the document. And it shouldn't really take that long. So that was her. And so anyway, and I'll post this whole thing when we're all done. I'll just let you skim it instead of reading it to you. You might go faster. One thing I think is of interest is the concerns now when there were no reviews before, 0. So naturally we have problems. We have them reviewed by engineers and attorneys. So I found that amusing. So this is an actual final version. That's all right. So basically, if you look at Paul's comment, I didn't think it was a big deal.
You're talking about the first one?
1.7. So,
well, not only that, you do reference another one, you just didn't print that whole one out, so I guess you didn't read far enough down.
right, no, I just didn't print it out. So I go, there's no adverse regulatory effect, and it could be added in the future. So I figured that is like a red herring for this whole thing. It doesn't really add any value to this discussion. So then the next one was she discussed the effective date. And all we did, as you recall, is just the effective date. So I mean, there's no like bad outcome from that either. And then the next comment about the 111, the repeal. So I didn't understand why that was a big deal either. So,
Well, the problem would have been if we hadn't added that language, is you could have ended up with 2 ordinances in effect.
right.
With a judge saying, you've got to meet the requirements in
Both
both of them,
ordinances.
including all the ones that were bogus.
Right, like if she hadn't written that back in hers and written every single one of them, we could have had the new land use ordinance plus all the other 7 or 8 other ordinances if she hadn't written that. So I just thought we were writing, basically copying or following her lead. That's what I actually thought that night.
Well, actually, I thought of it as an afterthought when I was looking over some of the
Right.
things and saying, crap.
Right, so. All right. Okay. So I didn't understand this either because, all right, this is a, wait, I missed one. Oh, repeal prior ordinances.
Oh, you're good at it.
All right. Let me just go back and double check. Point 1.2, 1.3. All right, right. So this is a discussion as, right, this is to carry out its duties despite comments. And, right, this is where, and actually I think in a more updated one, which I don't know how I got this one on here instead of the other one, but anyway, there was a comment, you know, there was other also concern that we had, we're letting like the engineers and outside forces control the interpretation of the ordinance. So I thought that by plainly stating it in the ordinance that the planning board was the authority for it would be a good thing and underline the fact that the consultants weren't going to tell us what our ordinance said.
Yeah, well, not only that, she was claiming that we were usurping power from the Board of Appeals or from the courts, but the court can always overrule anything, so.
Right. So then the establishment of parties. So Paula said, as you kind of recall, we had, Dave, you weren't here for this fund, but when we had never had somebody come in who wasn't like an adjoiner or whatever before, and say that they were going to be interested in a project, it basically had never happened in town, so we didn't really think of it in the ordinance, and we didn't really think of it as a board. And then when the Pisca project came in, we had people who were potentially affected, like the Beckfords, who were right, they weren't direct adjoiners, but they were one parcel over. And then we had a group of people who came in who were basically citizens living in the area from Hopkins Pond up and down the road, that weren't directly affected, and they wanted to come as a collective. So we didn't know how to handle it. So we had to go through, I bet you we had at least 2 meetings just about that, trying to figure that out. And we had to get an attorney involved, everything else. So that was the spawn of why I went through and did this. So then I thought, well, I didn't want to have to go through a big giant process for every single like shoreline zoning thing or some little subdivision or whatever. So I did actually make it only for the big projects. But even though, that's why, you can kind of see. And actually, if you, the law says, you have to go by main law anyway, so as far as that. So even if we screw up and don't have parties and didn't do it, or we didn't pick the right parties, the law would still enable people to be parties if they met the criteria for being parties, which I kind of outlined in the ordinance. That was the reason for outlining it in the ordinance. Because the other thing is it does give the planning board an opportunity to read through what they'll be looking for in terms of how to identify a party. That was kind of the point of it. So then there was this comment regarding fines, and she said something like we used.
Never used to have any.
Right. I'm like, okay.
This isn't just nitpicking.
Right, I know. I didn't even understand this because I think this is like verbatim what Dave Sepchek said to write. So I did. So this one would be, this definitely, as you recall, when we tried to figure out for the appeals and planning board decisions, she's concerned about this.
Actually, that one there, we should have left that one thing in. We're gonna have to address that in the fall, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you took out one paragraph, I think it was an accident, but it was taken
We have
out.
to go back and look at, well, one of the problems we had in the ordinance was, even going through, and I couldn't, I had a difficult time trying to figure out if I was going to appeal a project, what paragraph I had to cite to make the appeal.
Right, but this one particular that she mentioned had to do strictly with appeal of a CEO enforcement action. And that one paragraph was, I think when you added that other one, you accidentally took out that one.
All right, we have to go back and look at it then.
It's not like it's going to be a major thing happen between now and this fall, that we can put that back in and say.
Right, well, we should make just like maybe we need to just make a whole section for planning board appeals. And then it's really clear, what you're supposed to do. You don't have to go to 3 different places to try to figure it out.
But that wasn't about planning board appeals.
Well, now I realize that, but it was about appeals, but we didn't have a section for planning board appeals, we just had a section for code enforcement officer appeals. Planning board appeals, you just had to kind of.
Well, what you accidentally took out was the part where they could go to court.
Right.
For a CEO,
Right.
where they could appeal that higher. They can still do it because state law would supersede our ordinance in that aspect, but we should have left that one thing in.
All right.
But of course, nobody else ever made mistakes back in 2010.
Probably not. Okay. So this one was about, I have to refresh my memory here.
Okay.
this whole, it's just concerned about municipal officials, so. Right, I couldn't figure out, like, what would be the confusion, there's only two different types. The select board would be the only type, because we can't get involved in that stuff anyway, and I actually, that's why I wrote in that whole section about the planning board not getting involved in economic development.
Mhm.
It's just to make sure that this didn't happen.
Right, well, she complained about us taking us out of it too, so.
Right, I know, I have no idea.
But when you're talking about municipal officials being too vague, well, for what you're talking about there, you were talking, I believe that has to do with creating a development zone.
Right, but they have to work with municipal officials to get that going.
Right.
And the other one that-
In other words, for one of those to actually be done,
Right,
you would have to work with pretty much all the municipal officials. We could have, instead of using the words municipal officials, said planning board, select board, town office, and CEO.
right,
It's like, come on.
right. Okay. Okay, let's go back and read what I wrote, 5.9. Right, well, basically, you know, it just seems like she just wants to be the decider all the time, is what I finally concluded from that. She's just concerned about these gravel pits and mobile home parks being retroactively, you know, taken out of it. But we didn't take the campgrounds out, and a few other areas we didn't take out. You know, we didn't make them have to have new permits or existing operations to get permits. So I would think that somebody would say that it would be unjust to force one and not the other.
Well, the other problem with this is she has never brought this up in the 4 years that this has been that the town should go after these places. So basically the town has a possible legal liability and we're trying to eliminate it.
Right. So, right, in this part here, this one about the operational permit, I mean, it does need to be reworded. I think you and I both agree this needs to be reworded. But nobody's gonna get an operational permit between now and November anyway.
Would have
It's
been
not
nice if,
physically
it would have been
possible.
nice if that issue was brought up when we were discussing that.
Well,
So
I kind of agree with you, except for the fact that I think that that area is one of the areas that you were working on, so a final draft of that wasn't available to the end anyway.
For the operational permit?
Yeah, because that's where all your stuff
Well,
was.
operational permit's in number 5.
Well,
And we worked on number 5 back in February.
yeah, perhaps. Waiver requirements. Right, well, this is what we were ending up in court over.
Exactly. And the way Paula wrote that requirement, it can be argued that we could never issue any waivers for anything because of the particular language she used of any project. You can't have a waiver if the project has any, what was the exact wording she used?
It's right there.
No. Where's the, okay.
No concern or impact on adjoining property or the environment or public infrastructure. The planning board may waive. So you basically
So in other words, you have to have no discernible. Well,
Right.
everything has some discernible
discernible
impact.
impact. Right.
So basically, you're saying you can never issue a waiver for anything.
Right. So then, you know, I have a fairly detailed part about how to go through waivers. So anyway, there was a submission requirement. I'm sorry about that, I jumped ahead a little bit. There's a submission requirement. She didn't like the tables. was two of them. Of course, the tables, like you had recommended, because it was kind of wordy, laborious to read form, and then you recommended we came up with that table, and I thought it was a good idea. And I thought it was pretty obvious what that meant, because they request a waiver, and they request a waiver. Yes means you have to do it unless you request a waiver. No means you don't have to do it. And may means that we might ask you for it, and if you don't like it, ask for a waiver.
And that was a simple way of separating out the different tier levels
Right.
and saying, okay, for these small projects, you don't need to apply for a waiver.
Right.
You don't even need to bother.
Right.
While telling anyone with a major project, you're gonna have to do this unless you come up with a good excuse otherwise.
Right. So then, this is the economic development thing. And I don't know. Right, because in the first time that we wrote it, she didn't like it. And then I read through it and I agreed that it wasn't very good language. So then I changed it to fit the actual main statutes almost verbatim, and then she didn't like it. So that's why it was definitely a good find the first time. The second time I have no clue. So then this whole business, the pre-application conferences. So she says, they actually. No, they don't. They follow established law. Because you can't. Because right now, part of it is that it gets to be gamey, but you can't do it for subdivisions because subdivisions are all by statute. But site plans you don't have to go by. There is no statutory site plan rule. I mean, if you think about it, the way the rules are set up, it's not very smart because you have to have all this stuff done the first time you come in. It has to all be kind of ready to, almost like in nearly ready to approve format. So like, who wants to come as a developer and be honest with the town for what they want to do if they're worried? And then what ends up happening is you get, just generically, code enforcement officers and town officials and planning board members or whatever talking to people on the side because everybody's worried. Just everybody just wants to be helpful or whatever, and you create problems. I think that this way, by letting people bring a site plan in, and give their idea, and then have like 90 days to get you something I think is a little bit more reasonable and makes it more transparent, not less transparent. So that's why I did it. I've seen too many things happen over the years.
There's no ideal, and unfortunately small towns have limitations which larger municipalities don't have, and we've discussed.
Right. Yeah, they have a whole economic development department that can go talk to people in secret legally.
Right.
We don't. I mean, I didn't understand this at all. This whole buffering sentence. That's just nitpicking. I mean, I just think it was just simple. So,
And actually, this one on municipal services, this is much better than the original. If you take a look at the original again, take a look at the proposed development shall not have an unreasonable adverse impact. Okay, first of all, you have to define unreasonable adverse impact. There's one court case right there that both sides can argue over.
right.
Second, it doesn't tell you what to do about it if there is one.
Right.
The new wording says, we take a look at a possible adverse impact and we can actually do something about it, request mitigation
Right.
as part of the process.
Right.
So basically, we've got power now to actually do something and possibly avoid getting into court while doing it.
Right. So this is
Well, basically, under GPS 17, they wanted to leave an in so that they'd have something they could,
what, I mean, what do you want other portions,
Litigate.
wherever, yeah, I know. It's just, right, it's just silliness.
oh, on preservation of the landscape, if you look at the upper part, the words that we took out. The land, now, remember, this applies to everything in that section, GPS 24, not
Right.
just to non-residential.
Right, the whole entire town.
The whole entire town. And it says, the landscape shall be preserved in its natural state insofar as practical, minimizing tree removal, disturbance of soil, retaining existing vegetation during construction. That sounds all well and good, except if you followed that strictly, you couldn't put in a lawn,
Right.
you couldn't do anything on your property other than the minimum necessary to put in your house or driveway or
Right.
whatever. Because it's telling you the landscape shall be preserved in its natural state.
Right.
We left in the second part, which is important,
Right.
about environmentally sensitive areas.
You know, and then in some mailing that I saw, there's some claim laid to violating the state law. I have absolutely no idea where they get that from.
We aren't telling people you have to put flashing lights. In fact, they still have to, shoot, state law still supersedes.
Right.
We can't overrule state
I mean,
law.
I don't understand what's wrong with that sentence. I can't figure out, like, no, okay. You can't cause a problem for people who are driving and walking. Okay.
Once again, it gets into the, you know, what's too much interpretation,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, I just figure if they could put in, I mean, over in Holden, that sign in front of the hardware store, people seem to like that.
Yeah, I was noticing another one. I went by somewhere today that there's another new one up somewhere.
And Holden's
The
pretty
state
conservative.
law is very specific. They can only change so often
Right,
so that it's not a distraction for drivers and things. State law is very specific, that they are lighted, that they're changeable signs, and they do. You can see that's the wave of the future everywhere.
Well, look, these portable signs that are put up, I mean, those are changeable, different messages go on, that.
So I guess the state must be exempt from the
Some of them are
rules.
state, some of them aren't state, though, I've seen private, what appear to be private businesses, advertising,
I don't think
not necessarily in this area, but somewhere, I've seen in the state of Maine.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's running around hunting for them to.
Well, what's interesting, if I remember, I went and read the state ordinance, And if you'll notice, most of these signs, they change only every 2 minutes or 3 minutes when they change a complete display,
Yeah.
because that's what the state ordinance says. All of these warning signs that the state puts up change about every 30 seconds.
Well, it's
They're
the
breaking
state
their own
can
law.
exempt themselves, so. But even then, though, they still can't create a nuisance, or not a nuisance, but where it interferes with,
Right.
otherwise they could be held legally liable for an accident or whatever.
I mean, this next one is for mobile homes. Rick, I couldn't remember how it was done. I called Rick, and Rick told me that's what he recommended,
Yeah.
this. So that's why I put it in there, because Rick recommended it.
Well, and not only that, this is one time, is this legal? It's in 3/4 of the towns that have any ordinances on mobile homes now have this same requirement in it, in order to eliminate dangerous, older, non-code worthy, just literally dangerous for health and welfare, mobile homes being moved into a town.
Right.
My older ones, they move the wiring, they were a disaster.
Yeah, and they leak, and they're just,
Right.
and all of a sudden now she's worried about a discriminatory regulation.
Oh, that was really good.
Yeah, that was a hoot.
Okay.
And she didn't like any of the standards for
I mean, I just can't imagine why she would think, after having time to contemplate, it'd be good to have a 100-foot setback for a sign for your business.
Yeah.
Is that any structure?
Our regulations were just, quite frankly, I have to say, crazy.
Right.
I don't think you got those restrictive as what we had in there, even in Freeport, which is one of those towns.
I know.
Right.
So I think, and most of the building setbacks actually didn't get changed. The side setbacks got changed, but I think the front, the road to building setbacks ended up being about the same. It was all we did to parking areas and signs were the big changes.
And other auxiliary.
Ancillary buildings.
Right.
Right.
And if you looked at it, our original setbacks, as I said, you would have needed an 11-acre parcel to build in the middle of 1 acre.
Right, I know, it was pretty difficult.
It was a little crazy.
And then we didn't actually sit down and put calculations to it, because if we would have, I think we would have figured it out before.
Yeah.
We got so wrapped up with that wind stuff and everything else, we didn't get looked at very carefully. So Article 13 is what we're meeting on the 18th or whatever in June.
Before I forget it, the notice said at 5 o'clock, is that?
That's correct.
Okay.
Because it's not going to take very long to talk about Article 13, and the town meeting, the select board meeting is at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
So I figured just get it out of the way.
And I
Sure, there wasn't a typo or anything.
Will you be here? Will you be here on?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because we'll need the 3 of us to be here, because Gerald's going to be in Tennessee.
As far as I know.
Actually, it's a public hearing for the select board too, so maybe it wouldn't be necessary, so. But it's good if 3 of us are here. So. This is what we talked about, those again in a different context. And Dave Sefchak liked that language. I think I might have tweaked it a little tiny bit, but Dave told me it was okay.
Yeah, and I think you would have a real problem if you tried to force them into compliance with new standards because of the way the courts have ruled on grandfathering in general.
Right.
You could end up with a real mess.
Well, you have to have some significant reasons why, and we never built a rationale for doing that. Let me go back up to, we're almost to the end here, actually, I think. Mobile home parks. Oh, this is, so.
You said something about June 1st, did you mean, the board will look into it by June 1st?
Yeah, we did. That's why we had that thing go out yesterday and today.
Yeah, okay.
We looked into it, okay, and we have 13 days prior to the hearing to get something in the mail. So we did. We announced it. It was in the paper last week. So, we're all covered.
Okay.
And it's the 18th, and they went out yesterday and today, so we're still within the 13-day thing. Oh yeah. The thing with Woodchuck Hill, I mean, we already had this discussion several times that first of all, we were asked about it, it was an oversight, then we voted on it, and then somehow or another, it's probably my fault, I didn't get it back into the definitions because I probably was doing too many things, trying to get everything else tidied up in the other swirl stuff, and didn't get back in there. So despite the fact that, and that's why I wrote the other thing, so despite the fact that people sat in the back of the room, and we had a vote, and they watched us vote, and they videotaped us all vote unanimously to do it, they still wrote that we were going to take it off. Okay, so it's more what I would consider to be propaganda to distort how the planning board operates. So anyway,
And the person writing that never made any mistakes back in
probably not.
2010.
So, you know, we can correct that and make it retroactive to July 1st in November, and that's definitely not a big deal.
And we also voted not to list it as the Clifton Comprehensive Plan, but simply to list them
Right,
in Article 18.
right.
My feeling is, and I've seen other ordinances that have done the same thing, referencing their comprehensive plan, but the comprehensive plan does not have the same authority of law. It's a guide.
Sure.
So referencing it means you could ignore it anyway if you really wanted to and let them argue it out in court. By actually listing them and taking the words named in the comprehensive plan out,
It actually
which
makes
is
it
what we
more,
voted
makes it stronger.
to do, makes it stronger. And that was something else we voted to do. Hey, just an oversight. Considering how many things you were trying to write, it's like,
And for these, it's kind of implied you have to do the buying, you know, you have to get an operational permit up front, otherwise why would you have to renew it? But, I mean, it was a good catch. And I looked back through the other ones and the other subsections of Article 14, we do kind of say you have to, somewhere in there's a sentence that says you have to get an operational permit. So we should put the sentence in those two. I'm not quite sure how I didn't get that sentence in there. I was probably trying to make those two ordinances, or those two sections look similar to each other, because when I first started researching them, I couldn't find any two towns that had the exact same wording for both, because one came 1 year and one came like 2 or 3 years later. And they never bothered to go back and change the first one.
well, there was another thing I noticed, because I looked over brewers, and all they do is reference, they send you over to a whole other section of the ordinance dealing with licensing and everything.
Right, I know.
So it's very easy to overlook, because in brewer, it's a whole different ordinance that deals with that.
Right, I know. So that's what I was trying to, to make them fit into the way we do things, and that's how I got the wording a little bit. I could have done a better job on the wording in that, but, I'll tell you.
We need to add a sentence
Right.
to each section.
I definitely, didn't appreciate the soliloquy at the end saying yay me, and, the current planning board sucks,
Maybe we do.
considering the fact that she quit when we were trying to get the thing done. So anyway, that was really, I'll go home and get the more current version, which is essentially the same thing. I'll cut and paste them into the box. Yeah,
Okay, so that's that.
that's pretty much that. I mean, I didn't think if we needed to take any actions, you know, whatever, regarding anything else going on, any votes regarding like, you know, any other documents.
I have comments on the public hearing, which I would like to submit.
Holy crap, 1 year.
As usual, there was a lot of misinformation.
Holy crap, 50 decibels.
The chat is on the last page.
You have like a reference to this?
Well, the chat came right over the guidelines for community noise. I can send you that whole
If you can send me
guideline.
the web link, it would be good, because then I can publish this with the web link on it.
Yeah. The whole WHO community guidelines is long. It's split into sections.
Right, but if you gave me the web link and then said
I
like
will.
what page, oh yeah, it says on the bottom, page 65. You might want to spell wind without the H in it.
What's that?
On the second page,
I probably made a couple of spelling errors.
come on, stop it.
On what?
You go down to the second paragraph, third paragraph, roughly, purpose of only taking sound measurements when wind speed is low.
Okay.
You better do
You did.
the lines.
Yeah, you're right. Wind. Okay, cross out the little H. I must have missed the little red line underneath it.